Introduction. Deng Shirong was reborn and returned to the summer of 1980. In his past life, he believed in the words of a matchmaker, which led to unhappy marriages for several of his children. His two sons-in-law were unable to support the wall in mud, and several daughter-in-law's wives made a mess of the house. In this life, he will personally go out and find objects for his children. A few years later, when gathering with several old friends and discussing the issue of filial piety in their respective daughter-in-law, Deng Shirong didn't say anything. He just posted a WeChat moment in front of several old friends, saying that he suddenly wanted to eat Kiln's beer fish. At the next moment, several daughter-in-law living in different cities took turns calling him. Daughter-in-law, Dad, I'll drive back to pick you up for a trip to Kiln on Saturday. I haven't had any authentic beer fish in a long time. Second daughter-in-law. Dad, I don't have much to do right now. I'll drive back to pick you up and let's go to Kiln together for a few days. Third daughter-in-law. Dad, there's something else our company needs to handle. I'll have the driver go back to pick you up first. Fourth daughter-in-law. Little daughter-in-law. A few old friends were stunned and envious, their eyes turning red. This book mainly describes the customs and traditions of rural areas in Bobai County, Guangxi in the 1980s, focusing on matchmaking, food, and daily life. The book has a strong local flavor, real prices, reasonable plot, and requires careful tasting. Those who are restless should be cautious when entering. P.S. There is already an old book with a high order of 35,000 plus called Matchmaking. I don't believe it. Interested readers can go and take a look. Chapter 1. Reviewing the 90 and 80 years. You are listening at novelfull.audio. When Deng Shirong opened his eyes again, what caught his eye was an old table that would be despised for being used as firewood. On the table was a kerosene lamp, and inside the transparent glass lamp tube, a small flame emitted a dim light. Across the table, there was a small middle-aged man named Deng Yingui. In Deng Shirong's impression, this nephew who had been dressed in 5 clothes had been dead for nearly 20 years. At this moment, Deng Yingui was holding a water pipe in one hand and skillfully stuffing tobacco into the mouth of the pipe with the other hand. After stuffing the tobacco, he picked up the kerosene lamp on the table and lit the tobacco, then started smoking hookah with a thud-thud-thud. This scene made Deng Shirong's eyelids skip a beat, as if in a dream. Deng Yingui took a few puffs of cigarette before putting it into his pipe and looking at Deng Shirong, saying, "Uncle Joe, as the saying goes, those who hold on to their courage starve to their cowardice." Last summer, many people in the Shirong Brigade engaged in household contract production and even freed up manpower to engage in diversified businesses, earning a lot of money. "Uncle Joe, you said, those who charge ahead are not afraid. What's there to be afraid of when we follow the trend?" Upon hearing this, Deng Shirong had already remembered that the scene before him should have happened in 1980. At that time, his nephew Deng Yingui wanted to collaborate with him, a master of large cylinders, to contract out the kiln of the brigade. So, he should have been reborn back in 1980. "Uncle Joe, don't hesitate, let's work together." Deng Yingui's urging brought Deng Shirong back to his senses. He pondered and said, "Yingui, this is a big matter. You asked me to consider it and let you know the decision tomorrow." Deng Yingui didn't expect Uncle Joe to agree on the spot either. It was already fast enough to make a decision tomorrow. He quickly nodded and said, "Okay, Uncle Joe, please think carefully. If I have something else to do, I'll go back first." Deng Yingui had just left when 7 people of varying heights walked in. These 7 people were none other than Deng Shirong's 7 children. At the moment of seeing the boss Deng Yuntai, Deng Shirong, who had originally realized that even rebirth could still remain calm, couldn't help but become excited. Overall, he had not seen this steady eldest son for a full 44 years. In his past life, He partnered with Deng Yungue to contract out the cylinder tile kiln of the brigade and renamed it as the Cylinder Tile Factory. In August of the same year, the matchmaker introduced his eldest son Deng Yuntai to a girl from the neighboring commune, but Deng Yuntai had an accident on his way to a blind date. When Deng Shirong thought about the white-haired man giving the black-haired man away, he felt a faint pain in his heart. The unexpected death of his eldest son can be said to be the most regrettable thing in his life. "Dad, what's Yungue coming to talk to you about?" Because the room was dimly lit, Deng Yuntai didn't notice anything unusual about his father. Deng Shirong calmed down his excitement for a moment and said, "He wants to work with me to contract out the tank tile kiln of the brigade." Deng Yuntai's eyes lit up upon hearing the words and he said, "Dad, this is a good thing. Have you agreed to it?" Deng Shirong shook his head and said, "I haven't agreed yet." Deng Yuntai pondered and said, "Dad, are you worried about the wrong wind direction?" Deng Shirong smiled and said, "I'm not worried about the wind direction, mainly because I'm not very optimistic about the future development of the cylinder tile industry, so I didn't agree to it immediately." Speaking of which, Deng Shirong couldn't help but sigh inwardly. In his past life, he had partnered with Deng Yungue to run a cylinder tile factory. In the first few years, their business was decent, although they didn't make much money, they could still make their family eat meat every once in a while. Unfortunately, the good times didn't last long. With the development of society, there were very durable substitutes for everything from cylinders and boxes to pots and bowls. Things like cylinder tiles that would shatter at a touch gradually lost their market. If Deng Shirong remembers correctly, he and Deng Yungue started contracting the operation of the cylinder tile kiln in 1980. By 1987, the business of the cylinder tile factory had become difficult to do, and after barely operating for another 3 years, the cylinder tile factory, which had already begun to lose money, finally came to the end of its life. Deng Yuntai didn't expect his father to give him such a reason. After graduating from high school, he followed his father to learn how to make large cylinders and worked hard for more than 2 years. It wasn't until the end of last year that he officially graduated and became a qualified master of large cylinders. Now, as the teacher who taught him how to make large cylinders hand in hand, my father actually says that he doesn't have confidence in the future development of the cylinder tile industry. Our daily life cannot do without cylinder tiles. In theory, this industry should have a promising future. Dad, where did you see that the future development of this industry is not good? Deng Shirong said, "I'm just guessing. This industry is still quite popular in the short term." Deng Yuntai breathed a sigh of relief upon hearing the words and said, "That's good." "Dad, do you still plan to collaborate with brother Yungue to contract out the tank and tile kilns of the brigade?" asked the second person, Deng Yunheng. Deng Shirong has 5 sons and 2 daughters, named after the 5 sacred mountains. They are the eldest son, Deng Yuntai, who is 20 years old and has a high school education. Second-year student Deng Yunheng, 16 years old, is currently in his first year of high school. Deng Yunsong, the third child, is 12 years old and is currently in 5th grade of elementary school. Deng Yunhua, the fourth child, is 10 years old and is currently in the 3rd grade of elementary school. Deng Yunheng, the 5th child, is 8 years old and is currently in the 1st grade of elementary school. The 2 daughters are named after pearls, and the eldest daughter, Deng Yunjin, is 18 years old and holds a junior high school degree. My youngest daughter, Deng Yunju, is 14 years old and has a primary school education. Partnership should be possible, but I need to think carefully about what to do. Speaking of which, Deng Shirong waved his hand and said, "It's getting late too. Let's go to bed." "Oh." The children responded and went back to their room in the dark to sleep. After watching his children return to their rooms, Deng Shirong also carried a kerosene lamp back to his own room. Hearing the room full of earthy and linen smell, Deng Shirong felt more peaceful than ever before. He put the kerosene lamp on the stool, and then sat in front of the bed and began to study his golden fingers. At the moment of his rebirth, Deng Shirong felt something in his mind. It was only at that time that he was talking to his cousin Deng Yingui, and the impact of his sudden rebirth made him temporarily ignore it. Now that we have time, we naturally need to study and research carefully. After a few minutes of research, Deng Shirong showed a strange expression. The function of his golden finger was slightly beyond his expectations. The golden finger is called the Matchmaker reward system, which is currently the initial version 1.0 and has only one function, which is to earn 10 times the reward for matchmakers. Simply put, the money and goods obtained by Deng Shirong as a matchmaker will be given an additional 10 times reward by the Matchmaker reward system. This is forcing me to be a matchmaker. Deng Shirong couldn't help but sigh. If he were 20 years younger, he might give up the idea of becoming a matchmaker and choose to venture out on his own. With the extra 44 years of memory, he is sure to make a living. But even if he returned to 1980, Deng Shirong was already 44 years old and had no ambition to venture out. Since he was reborn with the help of the golden finger, he would stay in the countryside as a matchmaker and live a peaceful life. P.S. Big shots, I'm back. The new book is on its way, and my future is uncertain. I hope everyone can continue to read and support me. Thank you, Second Snake. Chapter 2. Regrets from Previous Lives. You are listening at novelfull.audio. The next day, just as it was dawn, Deng Shirong woke up. In his past life, after the age of 60, Deng Shirong slept less and less. He usually woke up at this time every morning and had already formed a biological clock. Dressed up and walking out of the room, Deng Shirong saw his eldest daughter Deng Yunjin cooking breakfast on the stove in the kitchen. He was not surprised by this either. His wife passed away 5 years ago, and before his eldest daughter got married, she was responsible for all 3 meals in the house. Deng Yunjin heard a noise and looked up to see her father. She said, "Dad, you're up too. Why don't you sleep a little longer? When I wake up, I can't sleep anymore." As he spoke, Deng Shirong looked at his eldest daughter. Before Deng Shirong was reborn, his eldest daughter was already in her 60s. Due to poor marriage, she worked hard for most of her life and was as old as an old woman in her 70s and 80s. Nowadays, even though Deng Yunjin is wearing patched old clothes, her skin appears rough due to the wind and sun, and her palms have been worn with calluses by various agricultural activities. She is currently in a period of youthful vigor. Moreover, Deng Yunjin is a whopping 1.62 meters tall, which is not a big deal in later generations and is not unusual in the north. However, in the rural areas of Guangxi during this era, it is definitely relatively rare. Perhaps the average height of Guangxi people ranks last in the country. Whether in this era or in later generations, height has always been valued by both parents when men and women talk about marriage. Being tall adds points, while being short reduces points. With Deng Yunjin's height of 1.62 meters and decent appearance, she was originally qualified to choose a family with good conditions to marry. Unfortunately, in her previous life, Deng Shirong did not attach enough importance to the marriage of her children, or rather believed in the words of matchmakers, resulting in none of her 6 children living happily ever after they got married. Deng Shirong was naturally affected by the conflict between his son and daughter. Law. In his later years, he was not short of money. His grandchildren would give him money during festivals and holidays, and his sons would also provide him with a fixed monthly living allowance of several thousand yuan. He couldn't spend it all as an old man. "I just haven't had any relatives by my side, staying alone in my hometown in the countryside. My children and grandchildren only come back occasionally to see him." Until the day Deng Shirong completely closed his eyes, he lived alone. It was impossible to say that he had no regrets in his heart. Now, the heavens have given him another chance. This time, he must take good control and find a suitable partner for his children, and not let them follow the old path of their past lives. Deng Yunjin said, "Dad, go brush your teeth and wash your face first. Kanji will be ready soon." Deng Shirong nodded and then went to brush his teeth and wash his face. Half an hour later, the other children also woke up one by one. In this era, there was still no electricity in the village, and there were no entertainment activities at night. Everyone went to bed early and naturally got up early, unlike those young people in later generations who couldn't even get up to sun-dry their buttocks. For breakfast, we had porridge with cucumber skin. The rice porridge here is quite different from the rice porridge in other places. Even if the rice porridge here is only a few meters long, it needs a large pot of water, and the rice soup is used as boiling water to drink. When Deng Shirong's life was the most difficult, he filled the bottom of the bowl with congee rice that could be counted clearly, and then tried his best to drink rice soup. When he had almost cheated his stomach, he ate those 2 mouthfuls of congee rice. The cucumber skin is not fresh and crisp, but dried. It is very hard to bite, but it tastes good as congee and pickles. After breakfast, Deng Shirong walked towards Deng Yingui's house. Although he had decided to become a matchmaker in the future, the cylinder tile factory could still make some money in the coming years, and he had no intention of giving up. In less than 2 minutes, we arrived at Deng Yingui's house. After greeting each other, Deng Shirong got to the point and said, "Yingui, I can partner with you to contract the cylinder tile kiln, but I don't plan on continuing to be the master of this large cylinder. If we partner to build a cylinder tile factory, I plan to let my family Yuntai become the master of this large cylinder. What do you think?" Deng Yingui was somewhat surprised when he heard this. The entire production team consisted of hundreds of people, and he only selected Uncle Jio as his partner for the following 3 reasons. 1. The 9th uncle has a high level of seniority. The first-generation ancestor of the Yeding family was relocated from Guangdong to settle here in the middle of the Ming dynasty, around 1500 AD. Starting from the 12th generation ancestor, they began to arrange their characters, which are ancestral merit, eternal prosperity, literary and literary excellence, upright character, benevolent and upright character, the radiance of the heavenly way, imperial inscriptions, and the success of the Yuan dynasty. Jiu Shu is a generation of generations, already the highest ranking of the Nei Deng family. In areas where clan values are relatively high, even if Jiu Shu is not a brigade cadre, he still has a certain say in the team. 2. Uncle Jiu is a well-known master of large cylinders, with excellent craftsmanship. The large cylinders he produces are better than those of other masters. 3. Uncle Jiu has a lot of courage and is not as afraid of things as other members of the club. Now, Uncle Jiu no longer intends to be the master of this large cylinder, which naturally has a significant impact on the cylinder tile factory that will be contracted out soon. After all, the master cylinder represents the highest technology of the cylinder tile factory. Uncle Jiu, why do you suddenly stop wanting to be a master of big cylinders? Deng Shirong naturally wouldn't say that he wanted to switch to becoming a matchmaker, so he found an excuse and said, "I'm getting older and my physical strength can't keep up. I'm not as skilled as young people. Anyway, my family Yuntai has already learned this skill, so just let him do it." Deng Yingui pondered for a moment before nodding and saying, "Okay, then let Yuntai be the master of the large vat. But if we really contract out the vat and tile kiln, one master of the large vat will definitely not be enough. We need to hire another one. This is simple, just let my disciple make up for it." "That's no problem then." After determining the candidate for the master of the large cylinder, the two of them then discussed the contract period for the cylinder tile kiln. Deng Yingui had already asked the cadres of the production team before. "If you want to contract this kiln, it will cost 100 yuan per year. If you contract for 10 years, it will cost 1,000 yuan, and if you contract for 20 years, it will cost 2,000 yuan. Looking for a book garden on www.zhaoshuyuan.com is so simple and crude. This contract price is not expensive. Deng Yingui tends to contract for 20 years, but Deng Shirong knows the development trajectory of the cylinder tile factory, so he naturally does not want to spend the same amount of money as in his previous life, so he insists on only contracting for 10 years. Deng Yungue advised, Uncle Jiu, I think we should have a longer term perspective. Anyway, this money doesn't need to be paid in full at once. Is it a bit short to only contract for 10 years? Deng Shirong smiled and said, 10 years is not short anymore. After all, society is changing day by day, and we are not sure what the world will become in 10 years. Maybe there will be new products to replace cylinder tiles. So, if we contract for 20 years, it will be a waste of money. In their past life, they had signed a 20-year contract, and even in the early years when their business was still going well, the two foolishly settled the 20-year contract fee in advance. In a few years, the cylinder tile factory began to decline, and the two of them barely managed to hold on for 10 years before having to declare bankruptcy, losing 1,000 yuan in contract fees in vain. That 1,000 yuan may not be a big deal for future generations, but in the early 1980s, it could definitely be considered a huge sum of money. Deng Yungue chuckled and said, Uncle Jiu, are you overthinking it? We have been using cylinder tiles for generations, how could they be replaced by other products in just a few decades? Deng Shirong also smiled meaningfully and said, Yungue, everything is possible in this world. Let's take on a 10-year contract first. If everything goes smoothly, we can renew the contract at that time. Although Deng Yungue felt that Uncle Jiu's concerns were unnecessary, since Uncle Jiu insisted, he didn't want to have any disagreements with him on this issue. He nodded and said, okay, 10 years is 10 years. P.S. In the new book period, following up on reading is very important. Please don't keep books, thank you. Chapter 3. Contract for Cylinder and Tile Kiln. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Sister, can you give me more oil? I also want to give you more, but take a look at this oil tank yourself. Our family will eat the oil in it until the end of the year. If we don't save some, how can we persist until the end of the year? When Deng Shirong returned home, he saw his eldest daughter Deng Yunjin frying dried radish in the kitchen. His second son Deng Yunheng helped to set the fire while eagerly looking at the oil tank on the stove. Deng Shirong suddenly realized that today is Sunday, and his second son, who is currently in high school, will have to go to school soon. Because his high school is in Songshan Commune, it takes about 3 hours to walk there, so he has to leave after lunch. Now, the eldest daughter is preparing pickled vegetables and a bottle of stir-fried radish for him, which will be the dishes for his second son at school for the next week. Deng Shirong approached and saw that the dried radish in the pot was almost cooked. Because his eldest daughter was reluctant to add oil, the dried radish looked dry and had no appetite at all. Dad! Seeing Deng Shirong approaching, the siblings greeted each other. Deng Shirong nodded and then picked up a spoon from the oil tank, scooped up a ball of lard about the size of an egg, and threw it into the pot. The clumps of lard quickly melted in the hot pot, making a sizzling sound. A strong oil aroma instantly spread, startling both siblings. Deng Shirong took a spatula from his eldest daughter's hand and quickly stir-fried it a few times, then put the stir-fried dried radish into a glass bottle that was already prepared. Looking at the oily and watery dried radish in the glass bottle, Deng Yunheng couldn't believe it and said, Dad, is this dried radish really for me to take to school to eat? Deng Shirong nodded again, then took out 2 yuan from his pocket and handed it to him, saying, eating dried radishes every day is not a problem. Take this money and buy some other dishes in the school cafeteria for a change. Deng Yunheng was completely foolish. He had been in high school for almost a year, and it was the first time he had enjoyed such high treatment. Deng Yunjin's eyes were filled with shock. It was unbelievable that her father had suddenly added so much oil to stir-fry dried carrots. However, what she never expected was that her father even paid her brother 2 yuan as living expenses, which completely subverted her imagination. Is father getting rich now? Seeing his children's shocked expression, Deng Shirong reached out and patted their second son's shoulder, saying earnestly, Yunheng, you should study hard in school. Now that the country values education, reading can be said to be the only way out for us rural people. You will graduate from high school in just over a year. If you can't get into college, you will have to come back and work hard. If you can get into college, your future will have unlimited possibilities. I'm not sure how much you can listen to when I say these things now. Anyway, I will do my best to ensure that you can eat well at school and have no worries. As for whether you can get into college or not, it depends on yourself. Others cannot help you, everything can only rely on your own efforts. In his past life, apart from his eldest son who passed away at a young age, the development of his second son was the most distressing for Deng Shirong among the other 4 sons. After graduating from high school, Deng Yunheng could only return to his own cylinder factory to learn the craft of making large cylinders from his father because he did not get into college. Due to Deng Yunheng's intelligence, flexibility, and great talent, ordinary people need to study for at least 2 to 3 years to become a master of large cylinders. As a result, he only took more than a month to learn and leapt to become a master of large cylinders. In the 1980s, the master of large vats was still very impressive in rural areas. In the division of labor of the entire cylinder tile factory, there are those responsible for picking mud, those responsible for stepping on mud, those responsible for producing fine goods, and those responsible for producing large goods. Among them, the pure physical labor of picking mud has the lowest wages. From picking mud early to picking mud late, working hard all day can earn about 1.5 yuan. It is unknown how many people are competing to do this. After all, there are too few profitable jobs in rural areas in this era. Next is the bricklayer, which has a slight technical level, so he can earn about 2 yuan a day. Making fine goods means making small things such as pots, bowls, jars, and jars. This skill level is much higher than stepping on mud. If you work hard, earning 5 or 6 yuan a day is not a problem. To produce large quantities of goods, it is the master of large cylinders. This is the technical ceiling of cylinder tile factories. Generally, a master of large cylinders can earn 7 or 8 yuan a day by working hard, while Deng Yunheng, a master of large cylinders, not only does his work beautifully, but also does it much faster than other masters. He can earn about 11 or 12 yuan a day. This income, even if placed in big cities, is still a drop in the bucket, let alone in rural areas. It is definitely a career with unlimited glory. If there were no significant changes in the cylinder tile market, Deng Yunheng might have been a master cylinder master for a lifetime until the day when he couldn't do it. Unfortunately, the cylinder tile factory began to decline a few years later. After doing less work, some people gradually started gambling at the cylinder tile factory. It was at that time that Deng Yunheng stepped into the mud pit of gambling and eventually became a professional gambler. Now that Deng Shirong is reliving his life, he naturally does not want his second son to follow the old path of gambling. That's why he spoke such words with great care, reminding him to study hard, and that it is best for him to get into college. If he fails, he can also be arranged to do other things. In short, try to avoid him going down the wrong path of gambling. Deng Yunheng was originally quick-witted. He looked at the bottle of oily dried radish on the stove and the 2 yuan he was holding in his hand, nodded with a heavy heart, and said, "Dad, I know now. I will definitely study hard." For lunch, Deng Shirong's family had sweet potatoes. Deng Shirong's NE production team is subordinate to the Bangjia Brigade of Songshan Commune in Bobai County, Guangxi. This is the south of the south. In the morning and evening, they basically eat porridge, and at noon, they eat sweet potatoes, cassava, taro and other grains. Of course, eating is basically like this, but whether one can eat enough or not depends on their respective family conditions. In a difficult family, porridge is thinner than mung bean water, and when you eat it, you lose your urine. As a master of large vats, Deng Shirong's living conditions in his family were relatively good in the early years. However, after his spouse passed away, he had to support several children's education, resulting in much worse living conditions. But 3 meals a day of porridge and cereals can still satisfy the family. After lunch, Deng Yunheng carried a small bag of rice on his back, then took the bottle of dried radish with enough oil and water, and carried the $2 given by his father in his pocket. In the envious eyes of his brothers and sisters, he walked out of the house and walked toward the school dozens of miles away with his head held high. Deng Shirong saw the longing in the eyes of his children. Last night before going to bed, he counted his assets and had only 136 yuan in total. 100 yuan was used to pay for the contracting fee of the kiln, and 2 yuan was given to my second son for living expenses, leaving only 30.4 yuan. This money was originally intended to be kept for the tuition of 4 sons, with the second son in high school having the most expensive miscellaneous expenses, costing 195 yuan per semester. Deng Yunsong, the third son, is going to junior high school next semester, while the fourth son and the youngest son are going to elementary school. Although their tuition fees are much cheaper compared to high school, they still add up to a lot of money. If it were Deng Shirong from a previous life, he would have to hold on to the 30 or so yuan tightly and not dare to spend a single penny easily. After all, it was too difficult to make money in rural areas in this era. Before the cylinder tile factory had no income, all expenses were saved if possible. However, Deng Shirong, who had been reborn, naturally had a different idea because he had a deep understanding in his heart. He told his eldest daughter, Jane, "Cook dinner tonight, and I'll make a stir-fried egg with green pepper for your siblings." As soon as these words were spoken, even Deng Yuntai, who was already 20 years old, couldn't help but swallow his saliva, let alone Yunsong, Yunhua, and Yunheng. These little guys jumped up with joy. Chapter 4. What are the conditions at home? Dare to eat oil like this. You are listening at novelfull.audio. The sun is setting in the west. Every household in Nei village is lighting a fire and cooking. Deng Shirong's family, except for his second son Deng Yunheng who had already gone to school, gathered in the kitchen with 6 other children, stretching their necks to watch him cook. At this moment, Deng Shirong was beating eggs, one after another, into a large bowl, and quickly finished beating all 10 or so eggs in the basket. In this scene, the 6 children's thoughts were mixed. Deng Yunjin, who has been cooking for the past few years, naturally feels heartbroken. If she were to cook so many eggs, she would at least be able to eat several meals. And Deng Yunhua and Deng Yunheng, who were still young, had their eyes lit up. They had more than 10 eggs, and on average, they could eat at least about 2. It was really satisfying. Deng Shirong used chopsticks to break up the eggs in the bowl, shredded the washed green peppers, and smashed the garlic used for seasoning. After finishing these, he began to mix the market cream water. Shigao is a Hakka dialect, and its book name is soybean paste. It is a brown-black paste like seasoning specially processed and boiled from black beans, rich in southern flavor. Its brown-yellow color and strong aroma are deeply loved by people. The Yulin area where Deng Shirong is located is its origin. Deng Shirong took out a bowl and dug out a small ball of market cream about the size of a thumb from the market cream cup. He added a little water to the bowl and boiled it for later use. At this moment, Deng Yunjin, the eldest daughter, had already washed the pot clean. Deng Shirong then spoke up and said, "Ah Zhen, you can start the fire." "Okay," Deng Yunjin responded and sat in front of the stove to start the fire. Quickly, the pot became hot. Deng Shirong picked up a spatula and shoveled it into the oil tank, filling it with a full spatula of lard and putting it into the iron pot. The solidified lard quickly melted in the hot iron pot. This scene stunned his 6 children. What are the conditions at home? Dare to eat oil like this. Deng Yunjin jumped up from the stove like burning her buttocks, reaching out to grab the spatula from her father's hand while saying in pain, "Dad, you better let me stir fry." Deng Shirong pushed away her hand and said, "Let me do it. I can stir fry better than you." If she were not facing her beloved father, Deng Yunjin would definitely curse. If I were willing to add oil like this, let alone stir-fry eggs, it would definitely be delicious even if I cut it with a belt. Seeing her father insisting on stir-frying, Deng Yunjin couldn't help but remind her, "Dad, you put too much oil in." Deng Shirong naturally understood the meaning of his eldest daughter's words. Their can of lard is meant to be eaten for a whole year, and they don't usually eat stir-fried vegetables at home. Occasionally, stir-fried vegetables can be saved as much as possible, just adding a little bit to moisten the pot. Only stir-fried dishes during the Chinese New Year and holidays will have a little more oil added than usual. But now, during the Chinese New Year holiday, Deng Shirong stir-fried dishes are filled with a large pot of lard. This behavior is not only in poor rural areas, but also in big cities. Perhaps not many people are willing to eat such oil. The key is that you have a great time eating now. After the lard in the oil tank is finished, how can you live without any oil? It's okay, the remaining oil can last for a while. I'll think of a way then. As Deng Shirong spoke, he saw that the temperature difference between the oil was not much, so he poured the beaten eggs into the pot. The eggs were put into the pot and quickly expanded under the action of oil temperature. Deng Shirong used a spatula to flip the eggs over, allowing both sides of the eggs to be evenly heated. When both sides of the eggs became slightly burnt yellow, he put them on a nearby plate. Leave the bottom oil in the pot and stir-fry with green peppers. After the green peppers are fried until they are completely raw, put the eggs on the plate into the pan and stir them together. At the same time, break the eggs with a spatula, add some raw salt, stir-fry a few times, add the crushed garlic, and then pour the previously prepared market cream along the edge of the pan. Sizzle when the market paste water encounters hot oil, a strong aroma rises from the pot. Deng Shirong quickly stir-fry a few times, and after the eggs and green peppers have evenly colored, he starts the pot and puts it on a plate. The entire cooking process was very smooth, as if busy but not chaotic, with a feeling of everything being under control, which surprised the 6 siblings of Deng Yunjin. Although they haven't eaten these 2 large plates of green pepper scrambled eggs yet and don't know how they taste, they seem very appetizing from the way they sell them. They really didn't know that their father's cooking skills were so good. Next, Deng Shirong washed the pot and stir-fried 2 plates of beans and 2 plates of water spinach. Although they were both vegetarian dishes, they looked very appetizing because he was willing to add oil. After frying the vegetarian dishes, Deng Shirong put down the spatula in his hand and looked at his already greedy children, saying, "All right, let's have dinner." As soon as the words fell, the children quickly began to move, and in less than a minute, they all had their meals ready and sat there waiting for Deng Shirong. Even the wine had already been poured for him, and the speed was very sharp compared to those children in later generations who shouted for a long time but didn't come to eat. Deng Shirong washed his hands and sat down. He picked up his chopsticks and said, "Let's all eat." As they spoke, they took the lead in moving their chopsticks. When their children saw their father moving their chopsticks, they eagerly followed suit and headed towards the 2 plates of green pepper scrambled eggs. "Wow, it's so fragrant. Delicious, it's really delicious. Dad's cooking skills are so good, this green pepper scrambled egg is much more delicious than what Big Sister makes." Upon hearing the admiration of his children, Deng Shirong was also quite proud in his heart. At this time in his past life, he actually had no culinary skills to speak of. After all, before he got married, it was his mother who cooked. After he got married, he went to Shuyuan www.zhaoshuyuan.com to cook for his wife. After his wife passed away, it was his eldest daughter who cooked. After the eldest daughter gets married, it's her turn to cook for the youngest daughter. After his youngest daughter got married, he followed his sons to eat for a few more years. It was not until Deng Shirong lived alone in his rural hometown that he began to learn how to cook. As a result, he was surprised to learn that he had a very good cooking talent. He knew everything at once and became proficient in it. In just a few months, his cooking skills were no less than those of professional chefs. It can be said that with Deng Shirong's cooking talent, if he had the opportunity to learn from a skilled chef when he was young, he would probably have a place in the culinary industry of our country. This meal was quite satisfying for the 6 children, including Deng Yuntai, Deng Yunjin, Deng Yunju, and Deng Yunsong, each with 3 bowls of rice as a foundation. Deng Yunhua and Deng Yunheng, these 2 little ones, also ate 2 big bowls of rice. After eating too much, Deng Yunsong couldn't help but stroke his stomach and exclaim, "If we could eat like this every day in the future, it would really be a fairy-like day." Deng Shirong couldn't help but feel emotional upon hearing these words. No one living in this era could have imagined that China would embark on a path of rapid development in the more than 40 years after the reform and opening up, and the entire country would undergo earth-shaking changes. In the future, let alone eating green pepper and scrambled eggs every day, pork can be eaten every day, and it is not just a few households with good conditions, but most households in the country have the conditions to eat it this way. In such a prosperous era, even the great man who created this miracle with his own hands may not be imagined at this moment, right? P.S. Ladies and gentlemen, if possible, try to come to UU to read books. Here is the author's accompanying picture, which can be eaten together with the text for better results. Smiley face. Chapter 5. First Matchmaking. You are listening at novelfull.audio. After Deng Shirong and Deng Yungui partnered to contract out the cylinder tile kiln, they could actually start construction at any time because everything was ready. Made. However, today is already the 18th day of the 5th lunar month, and there are still a few days left for the production team to harvest crops. This is the busiest and hardest time of the year, and all members of the society must participate in labor. At this time, the cylinder tile factory is obviously not suitable for opening. Deng Shirong, who has experienced it, understands that this harvest can be said to be the last collective labor of their production team. After the harvest is completed, the team cadres will comply with public opinion and start dividing the land into households. Seeing that the cylinder tile factory had not started yet and there were still several days left before harvesting, Deng Shirong naturally did not waste this rare leisure time. After breakfast, he walked to another cousin Deng Yunxiang's house. Ne village and several nearby natural villages are all settlements of the Deng surname. Apart from the married women, there is not a single person with a foreign surname in the village, so everyone is from the same ancestor, just looking at how many generations have passed. When Deng Shirong arrived at Deng Yunxiang's house, he was sitting at the door smoking a hookah. In this era, due to the cultivation of tobacco leaves in various natural villages, most men, women, and children would smoke in this environment. After greeting each other, Deng Shirong went straight to the topic and asked, "Yun Chang, your Changfu family is already 21 years old this year and should marry a wife. I think there is a pretty good girl in Sham Shui Tian village. Do you want me to help lead the strings?" In the rural areas of Bobai County, whether in this era or in the future, there are many people who are enthusiastic about matchmaking familiar people, not to make money from that matchmaker, but mainly to experience the sense of achievement of personally matching a couple. So hearing Deng Shirong say this, Deng Yunxiang was not surprised at all, on the contrary, he was invigorated. "Uncle Jiu, whose family's girl are you talking about?" Deepwater Tian village is not far from Ne village, and it can be reached by walking for about 20 minutes. Although Deng Yunxiang may not know all the people in the village, he also knows many of them, which is why he asked this question. Deng Shirong smiled and said, "From the Guandui family." Deng Yunxiang held the chimney for a moment and said, "I don't know Guandui, but the name sounds quite familiar to me. I think I've heard of someone before." Deng Shirong reminded, the official Du who works in the supply and marketing cooperative is his younger brother. It turned out to be the older brother of official virtue and martial arts. Deng Yunxiang suddenly realized and immediately moved his heart, truly valuing the object that Uncle Jiu introduced to his eldest son. Deng Shirong said, "The eldest daughter of Guandui is 19 years old this year. She graduated from high school and elementary school. Although she is not very beautiful, she has a good personality and is hardworking and capable. She is a good housekeeper. If anyone can marry such a woman, they can live a prosperous life." If you think it's okay, I will go to her house to inquire about her parents' opinions. Okay, then please trouble Uncle Joe. People in this era get married relatively early, and his 21-year-old son has already reached a suitable age for marriage. Deng Shirong originally planned to wait for the production team to finish cutting the grain and have some leisure time before asking a matchmaker to help his eldest son find a partner. Now Uncle Joe's initiative to come and introduce himself is the best. Deng Shirong said, "Well, I'll go ask later. I guess there's no problem. Today happens to be the fair day, so please make your family changfu prepared. If the girl has no objections, I'll arrange for them to meet at Shuangwang Fair." Deng Shirong was somewhat surprised by Uncle Joe's speed when he heard this, but he still readily agreed. To achieve his goal, Deng Shirong went to the supply and marketing department of the brigade, branches of the supply and marketing cooperative in each brigade, to buy some candy cookies, and then borrowed a bicycle from the production team to rush towards Sham Shui Tian village. This is Deng Shirong's first time serving as a matchmaker. The reason why he chose Deng Shirong's eldest son, Deng Changfu, is mainly because in his past life, Deng Changfu and his wife were well-known model couples in the village. They have been married for decades and have always been a husband and wife. They have never had a red face, and their childhood has been prosperous. Such a marriage destined to be happy, Deng Shirong naturally needs to actively help mediate. A few minutes later, Deng Shirong rode his bike to Sham Shui Tian village and arrived at Guan Dui's house, familiar with the way. At a glance, he saw Guan Dui sitting at the door, weaving a valley. 9 uncles. Seeing Deng Shirong, Guan Dui quickly put down his work and stood up, greeted with enthusiasm. "Come in and eat a bowl of congee first." Deng Shirong, as the master of the large vat kiln in the brigade, has a very high reputation in the entire Bangjia brigade. Most people know him, and coupled with his high seniority, even if he is not a person of the same surname, he will be respectfully called Joshu. "I have already eaten it." Deng Shirong smiled and parked his bike, then reached into his pocket and took out the candy cookies wrapped in straw paper. He handed them to Guan Dui and said, "These are candy cakes for the children." A hint of surprise flashed in Guan Dui's eyes. Although he knew Deng Shirong, their relationship was not good enough to bring candies and cakes around, and he didn't know what the other party meant by this incident. Thinking in his heart, Guan Dui said, "Uncle Joe, you're so polite. If there's anything I can help you with, just speak up." While speaking, Guan Dui reached out and took the candy cake. Whether or not to accept it in the end depends on what the other party came for. Deng Shirong didn't beat around the bush. After a few polite words, he said directly, "Biao, it's like this. I heard that your eldest daughter is already 19 years old this year and hasn't talked to anyone yet. I want to help become a matchmaker. I wonder if your family has any intentions in this regard." Upon hearing these words, Guan Dui immediately understood. He handed Deng Shirong a chimney, tobacco, and matches, and went to the Shuyuan website www.zhaoshuyuan.com. He said, "As the saying goes, a man should marry a woman when he gets married. My family, Youngying, is indeed at the age of my husband's family. If there is a suitable candidate, then naturally I have no objection." Deng Shirong supported the water pipe and stuffed tobacco into the cigarette holder, saying, "I would like to introduce your daughter to Deng Changfu, the eldest son of Deng Shirong in our village. He is 21 years old and tall, about 1.78 meters tall. He also has great strength, and it is easy to get 10 work points in our production team. He has a humble personality, is a good person, and has almost no temper. His parents are also known for their kindness in our village. If your eldest daughter follows him, you don't have to worry about being bullied at this point." Deng Shirong lit the match, lit the tobacco, and took a few puffs before continuing. "He has 5 siblings, 2 younger sisters below, and finally 2 younger brothers. You should understand what this means, so I don't need to say more." Guan Dui naturally understood that if his daughter marries and has children, not only will her in-laws help take care of them, but her two younger sister-in-law can also help. At least several years later, when the two younger uncles get married and have children, the benefits for her sister-in-law are very obvious. Guan Dui was somewhat moved in his heart, but he still asked, "Uncle Jiu, what are the conditions of their family?" Deng Shirong continued to stuff tobacco into his cigarette holder and said, "Both Deng Yunxiang and his wife are hardworking, healthy, and have sufficient labor at home. Naturally, their conditions are not much worse. However, you are aware of everyone's current conditions and should not have high expectations. I understand this, as long as their family's conditions are not too poor." Speaking of which, Guan Dui pondered for a moment before continuing, "Uncle Jiu, then you can choose a time to arrange for them to meet." Chapter 6. Blind Date. You are listening at Novel Full.audio. Xuanwang is a township that belonged to Longtan District, Bobai County during the Republic of China period. After liberation, it was abolished and merged with Songshan to form 13 districts in 1950. Xuanwang Township was established in January 1958 and merged with Songshan Township to form Songshan Commune in August of the same year. In September 1984, it was renamed Songshan Township, and it was not until January 1986 that Xuanwang Township was separated from Songshan Township and re-established. In August 1993, it was renamed Xuanwang Town. It is now 1980. Although Xuanwang and Songshan merged to form Songshan Commune, Xuanwang still exists, but its influence is relatively small. The number of people rushing to the weir during each weir period is only about 1,000, unlike the neighboring Longtan weir, where the number of people rushing to the weir is as high as 20,000 to 30,000. When Guan Yongying and Ant Man arrived at Xuanwangwei, it was almost 11 o'clock. Because the blind date came too suddenly, Guan Yongying, who was not mentally prepared, felt a bit panicked and kept holding on to Ant Man's arm. It can be said that he had written his nervousness on his face. Upon seeing this, Aunt Guan patted her niece's hand and comforted her, saying, "Yongying, you just made an appointment with him to meet. He's not a man-eating tiger, what are you afraid of?" Guan Yongying bowed his head and said, "It's so sudden. I didn't have any psychological preparation. My father really did. He directly promised the matchmaker to arrange a meeting today. If it were postponed for a few days, I might not be as nervous as I am now." Aunt Guan was a passerby and naturally understood her niece's feelings. She comforted her again, "Just pretend you don't know about this and treat him like a passerby, so there won't be any psychological burden." Upon hearing this, Guan Yongying's nervousness slightly eased. Next, she went to the supply and marketing cooperative with Aunt Man to greet Uncle Man, and then walked towards the agreed meeting place. Under a big banyan tree diagonally opposite the entrance of Xuanwang Junior High School, Deng Changfu, dressed in a clean blue shirt, looked around with a slightly excited expression, trying to find the girl he was going on a blind date with from the crowd of people. Deng Shirong couldn't help but smile at the situation. It seemed that his great-nephew had long wanted to marry his wife. He smiled and explained, "Changfu, the girl has a thin face. When you pass by here, be careful not to keep staring at her, you know. Blind dates in this era are very different from those in later generations. In later generations, blind dates are arranged directly at a designated location, and then everyone meets to chat. There is nothing shy about both men and women. But now the women on blind dates are extremely reserved, and it is impossible to meet and chat directly with the man. Instead, they arrange a place, like under this big banyan tree, and then the woman passes by like a normal shopping street, just to see each other. If you can't see clearly once or twice, then walk back and forth a few more times. Anyway, both sides haven't made it clear, so it's not too awkward." Deng Changfu nodded and said, "I know Jiugong." Deng Changfu's mother also explained, "You just need to pay attention to your own propriety. Don't stare and scare other girls, but you need to see people clearly. After all, this is a big marriage matter, and you can't be careless at all." Deng Changfu nodded again and said, "Mom, I know." The time and place for the meeting were originally agreed upon, so the three of them stood there and didn't wait long. Deng Shirong saw Guan Yongying walking hand in hand with Ant Man. Deng Shirong immediately nodded at her and then softly reminded her, "Changfu, the people are here." Deng Changfu's spirit was boosted upon hearing this, and his gaze instantly locked on Guan Yongying. Changfu's mother also widened her eyes and looked over. At this moment, Guan Yongying tightly held Ant Man's hand, with a slight blush on her face. She dared not look towards the big banyan tree, but kept looking ahead, as if there was something attractive to her. Of course, Guan Yongying dared not look towards the big banyan tree, but as a passerby, Guan Xiaoanti naturally wouldn't be as shy as a little girl. She first nodded at Deng Shirong, the matchmaker, as a greeting, and then her gaze stayed on Deng Changfu. In this way, there was no communication between the two sides, and a brush-by was achieved. After walking a little further away, Aunt Guan asked, "Yongying, this young man is indeed as tall and robust as the matchmaker said, quite a spirited young man. Did you just take a look?" Guan Yongying quickly shook his head and said, "I was too nervous just now and didn't dare to look over there." Aunt Guan immediately comforted, "It's okay, let's walk back and forth a few times later, not afraid of not being able to see clearly." On the other side, Deng Shirong asked, "Changfu, have you seen it clearly?" Deng Changfu nodded and shook his head, saying, "I've taken a rough look, I need to take another look." Deng Shirong smiled and said, "It's okay, the girl will come back later. Just pay attention and take a look." Changfu's mother said, "I look pretty good, with a sturdy figure and a girl who can have children." Quickly, Guan Yongying and her Ant Man walked back from the original path arm in arm. This time, they had enough psychological preparation, and she was not as nervous as when she passed by for the first time. Finally, she turned her head and glanced at the big banyan tree. At this glance, Yu reading www.yuukangshu.net made Guan Yongying's heart rate accelerate. Deng Changfu's tall and robust figure made him feel very secure, and his face was indeed as kind as the matchmaker claimed. This first impression, Guan Yongying is satisfied. Eye contact is a wonderful thing, especially during blind dates. Whether or not there is eye contact determines the possibility of a relationship between two people. The so-called eye margin is the desire to open your eyes and enter your heart as soon as you see it. A good eye relationship is the kind of feeling that women will seductively call brother Sanzang when they see it, and men will greedily call sister Changa when they see it. In later generations, some people lamented that they passed by many people every day, their clothes were scratched, but still couldn't produce any sparks. It can be seen that things like eye contact are truly destined by fate and cannot be surpassed by human labor. Deng Changfu and Guan Yongying, a well-known model couple from their previous lives in the village, undoubtedly had eye contact. At this moment, their eyes unintentionally met. At that moment, the two of them felt as if they had been electrocuted, their hearts stirred with excitement. When Guan Yongying and her Ant Man walked away again, Deng Shirong asked again, "Changfu, how are you? Did you see clearly this time?" Deng Changfu regained his senses and said in an excited tone, "You see clearly, this girl is not bad, she is the type I like." Deng Shirong was not surprised at all when he heard this. After all, he was a well-known model couple in the village, and falling in love at first sight was also a basic skill. He asked, "Changfu mom, what do you think?" Changfu's mother said, "This girl is pretty good. I'm quite satisfied with her. Uncle Chio, go ask her and see if she's willing to go for lunch together." Deng Shirong nodded with a smile and said, "Okay, then you guys wait for me here first. I'll go over and ask. I guess there's no problem." Chapter 7. Hidden Rules. You are listening at Novel Full.audio. Less than 50 meters away from the big banyan tree, Deng Shirong met Guan Yongying and her aunt. After the meeting, Deng Shirong directly asked, "How is it? Have people seen it clearly?" Guan Yongying said, somewhat embarrassed, I just took a glance and haven't seen it very clearly yet. Deng Shirong wore a smile on his face and said, it's okay. If we haven't seen it clearly, let's look a few more times until we see it clearly. Seeing Uncle Jiao coming over, Aunt Guan knew that the man's side should have made a statement and asked, Uncle Jiao, what does the man's side say? Deng Shirong smiled and said, they think Yongying is good and would like to treat you to lunch. Let me ask for your opinion. Upon hearing this, Aunt Guan couldn't help but look at her own niece. In this era, there are many hidden rules for blind dates. In the realm of Bobai, blind dates can be roughly divided into 3 steps. The first step is for the matchmaker to arrange for both men and women to meet, which is called getting to know each other. After getting to know each other, if both the man and the woman express satisfaction, the matchmaker will ask for the woman's value, dowry, and other requirements on behalf of the man. If the female party is willing to meet all the demands for money, the matchmaker will arrange for the female party to bring relatives and friends to the male party's house to see the situation. This step is called checking the door. Looking at the family door is actually a bit similar to engagement in other places. Generally, when we reach the step of looking at the family door, it is highly likely that this marriage will be successful. Occasionally encountering a woman who reneges, she must return all the expenses incurred by the man, since the blind date, even if one point is missing, the woman will be stabbed in the spine. If you want to play tricks and refuse to repay the money, the man will ask the team cadres to come forward and deal with it. In this way, the woman's reputation will be completely ruined, and generally the woman will not be foolish enough to take this step. After looking at the house, the next step is to discuss choosing an auspicious day in the Chinese zodiac to get married. Here, marriage generally refers to setting up wine, which is the final step of a blind date. As for registration, as long as the price is given, you can register at any time. In this blind date trilogy, the first step of getting to know each other also has its underlying rules. If the man is not satisfied with the woman, he basically sends a red envelope and generally does not treat her to another meal. If the man asks the matchmaker to invite the woman to dinner together, it proves that the man has a good first impression of the woman and hopes to further develop it. At this point, if the woman's first impression of the man is also good, she can agree to go eat this meal. If the woman doesn't like the man, she will find an excuse to refuse to eat this meal. So, Aunt Guan immediately looked at her niece, wanting to know what decision she had made. When Guan Yongying came out for the blind date, her parents had already explained the details to her. So when she saw Aunt Man's questioning gaze, she shyly said, I didn't see the person clearly just now. Let's wait until I see it clearly before we can decide whether to eat or not. Deng Shirong smiled and said, okay, let's take another round trip and take a good look before we talk. So the 3 of them walked towards the big banyan tree again. 10 minutes later, when Deng Shirong and the 3 of them walked back and forth towards the big banyan tree, Deng Shirong asked again the previous sentence about eating together. This time, Guan Yongying, who had already seen clearly, no longer avoided and nodded slightly towards Aunt Man. Upon receiving her niece's instructions, Aunt Guan took the initiative and agreed. Although Shuangwangwai is a market with little presence, as the saying goes, although sparrows are small and have all 5 organs, there are still some people engaged in catering in this place with a pavilion area of only over 500 square meters. Among them, there are 3 noodle stalls, which are the most economical and frequented. After all, eating a bowl of noodles now only costs a few cents, and most people can still afford it. Of course, in this era, noodle stalls not only sell noodles, but also operate various stir-fry overall. The prices are relatively affordable, so the business is very good. It's rare to encounter a girl he likes, but Deng Changfu didn't have the intention of treating guests to a meal at a noodle stand. Instead, he led people into a state-owned restaurant. He also listened to Jiogong's advice, and when he came out for a blind date, Jiogong told him not to save money when it's time to spend it. For example, inviting a blind date to a meal is something that can make a girl remember for a lifetime, so you must be generous and give her face. If the two of them become successful in the future, his wife will have a smile on her face when she mentions this matter to others, and then you will understand how much the money is worth spending. Although Deng Changfu has not yet understood these words, Jiugong has eaten more salt than he has eaten rice, so he must not be wrong when listening to his old man's advice. So for today's meal, Deng Changfu is planning to save money. At the moment of entering the state-owned restaurant, Guan Yongying and her aunt both showed satisfaction. The state-owned restaurant is definitely the most upscale restaurant in Shuangwangwai at present. It is enviable to have a meal here. Deng Changfu was willing to invite them here for a meal, which is enough to show his attitude towards her. When Deng Changfu ordered the dishes, not only Guan Yongying was satisfied, but even the official aunt thought that this young man was good and really generous. Deng Changfu ordered 6 dishes in total, 1 plate of white-cut chicken, 1 plate of sour and sweet pork, 1 pot of pig soup, 1 plate of landscape tofu, 1 plate of fried peanuts, 1 plate of seasonal vegetables, 1 kilogram of local rice wine, 3 meat and 3 vegetable dishes, and wine. This is a very good hospitality dish. During dinner, Deng Shirong led the conversation and said, "In a few days, our production team will start harvesting crops. Auntie Oh, your production team should also be harvesting crops around this time, right?" Aunt Guan nodded and said, "It's almost the same. Our team leader has already informed all members to prepare." Deng Shirong said. Since some members of Shirlong Brigade of Nabu Commune took the lead in fixing production quotas and getting a daifengshu, salad of assorted fresh vegetables, at home last summer, many members of our Bangjia Brigade wanted to follow suit, but because of the lack of instructions from the superior leaders, the cadres of the brigade did not dare to talk about it. Now, a year has passed. Go to the Shirlong Brigade of Shuyuan www.zhaoshuyuan.com to find out that the more we work, the better. Not only is there a daifengshu, salad of assorted fresh vegetables, of food, but other sidelines are also doing briskly, and economic income has increased greatly. Stimulated by this, other teams have also started to split fields and work independently. What is the situation with our Bangjia team, Auntie Oh? Do you know? Aunt Guan said, "I heard from Ah Wu at home that the cadres of our Bangjia Brigade have also had the idea of allowing everyone to divide the land and work independently. As for when it will be implemented, he didn't tell me much." Deng Shirong said, "As far as I know, after each production team finishes harvesting the grain, the cadres of the brigade will start dividing the fields to households." Uncle Joe, is this news reliable? Reliable, divide the land equally to households, and everyone's life will have hope. This meal took 5 people almost an hour to finish, and Changfu's mother left for almost 20 minutes before carrying a cardboard box back. If it is a blind date in later generations, the man will have to send red envelopes when the woman leaves. However, in this era, it is impossible for the man to send red envelopes to the woman in person. Instead, he hands over the red envelopes and other gifts to the matchmaker, who will specifically deliver them to the woman's home. Therefore, after the woman left, Changfu's mother brought the cardboard box she had previously brought back to Deng Shirong and said, "Uncle Joe, here are 2 pieces of pork belly and 3 portions of candy cakes that I bought. I have already divided them up, so I know how to give them to you." As she spoke, Changfu's mother gritted her teeth and took out 10 yuan from her pocket, dividing it into 3 parts. 3 yuan, 5 yuan, and 2 yuan. "Uncle Joe, this is the red envelope for you, this is the girl's red envelope, this is her aunt's red envelope." Deng Shirong took the money and smiled, "I know what to do. You guys go home and wait for good news from me." Chapter 8. Matchmaker Reward System, Incense. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Uncle Man. In the Supply and Marketing Society, Guan Yongying greeted Man Shu Guandu. Guandu asked with a smile, "Yongying, that young man should be pretty good, right? Where did he treat you to for dinner?" What dishes did he eat? Aunt Guan answered. That young man is really good, and he is very generous. He invited us to eat in the state-owned hotel, ordered 3 meat dishes, white-cut chicken, sour and sweet pork, pig soup, and 3 vegetable dishes, which cost a total of 6 or 7 yuan. Guandu was somewhat surprised when he heard this and said, he invited you to a state-owned restaurant for dinner. This young man has indeed invested a lot of money, proving that he really has a crush on our family, Youngying. Guan Youngying smiled shyly. The man on the blind date did a great job and gave her enough face. Her parents have told her that many girls in their village have come out for blind dates, and even if the man is satisfied, he only treats them to a meal at a noodle stand. They have never heard of any girl who has the opportunity to go to a state-owned restaurant for a blind date. Her blind date this time can be considered as a small opening for their deep-water village. Alright, we're just here to say hello to you and take a bike back. Uncle Joe will be sending red envelopes and gifts to your home soon. If we're not at home, it won't be good, said Aunt Guan. Guandu nodded and said, well, then you can ride your bike back. I'll just walk back after work. In today's era, apart from public bicycles, there are very few private individuals who can afford bicycles in the entire Shuangwang Mirror domain. The entire Sham Shui Tian village was bought by Guandu, who works in a supply and marketing cooperative, earlier this year. So, after saying hello, the official aunt hurriedly rode her own bicycle and carried her niece to the house. Around 2 p.m., Deng Shirong arrived at Guandui's house again with the man's red envelope and gifts. At this point, the process of our daughter's acquaintance today has been known by Guandui and his wife. They are quite satisfied with the man's performance on their side. The most important thing is that their daughter has already agreed to have lunch with the man, which proves that their daughter is also satisfied with the man, and then this marriage is indeed remarkable. Therefore, for Deng Shirong, the matchmaker who came to visit again, the Guandui couple were extremely enthusiastic. After greeting each other, Deng Shirong untied the cardboard box on the bike, took out a piece of pork belly and a pack of candy cakes, and said, "This is for my grandparents." The blind date rules of Shuangwang Mirror domain require the man to prepare an additional gift if the woman's grandparents are still alive and satisfied during the meeting. Youngying's mother quickly reached out to take the pork and candy cakes. Deng Shirong took out a pack of candy cakes from the cardboard box and took out 2 yuan from his pocket, handing it to the nearby official aunt and saying, "Aunt Man, this is yours." Aunt Guan smiled and reached out to take the red envelope. She gave it generously. Generally, people who go on blind dates with the woman only receive a few cents in red envelopes, which is usually only 1 yuan. She can get 2 yuan in red envelopes, which is quite good. After all, many people only give the protagonist 2 or 3 yuan in red envelopes. Deng Shirong took out 5 yuan from his pocket again, and took out the remaining piece of pork belly and a pack of candy cakes from the cardboard box. He smiled and said, "These are Youngying's." Guan Youngying felt embarrassed to take it, so Youngying's mother took the money and goods from Deng Shirong's hand on his behalf. After Youngying's mother put the things away, Deng Shirong said, "Youngying's father and mother, I'm sure you all know how they met today. My nephew and grandson fell in love with Youngying at a glance, and his mother is also very satisfied with Youngying. Now it depends on your attitude." Guandui glanced at his wife and pondered, "Uncle Jiu, your nephew is really impressive in his work. Although we haven't seen anyone yet, we have a good impression of him. This marriage can be discussed." This result was expected by Deng Shirong, who smiled and said, "Since both of you are satisfied, let's not play around. How much do you want for this body? What other items do you want?" As soon as he talked about his worth, Guan Youngying blushed with embarrassment and wanted to hide. However, he was also curious in his heart, so he endured the embarrassment and sat next to him listening. As for Aunt Guan, she also sat there as an audience member, and it was definitely not her turn to speak. If you are satisfied with getting to know each other, the next step is to look at the family door. Before looking at the family door, you need to negotiate in advance about how much the woman's worth is and what other items she wants. Because visiting a family is equivalent to getting engaged, the woman will definitely not agree to visit the family until the conditions are agreed upon. As for the value and money of their daughter, the Guandui couple obviously had already discussed it, so there was no need to hide it from the matchmaker. The couple then offered the conditions one by one. Cash costs 288 yuan, grain costs 300 pounds, a sewing machine, and I also need to take Guanyanging to make 6 new sets of clothes. All of this adds up to about 500 yuan. If Yu reads www.yuyukeangshu.net, including the money spent on making acquaintances and watching the next door, as well as the money spent on the matchmaker, it will cost at least 600 yuan to get a wife back. This money is not a small amount in today's era, but Deng Shirong knows that it is not the woman asking for exorbitant prices, but rather the current trend of marriage. In short, whether it is the current era of poverty or the era where the whole population has been lifted out of poverty in later generations, marrying a wife has never been an easy task. After the woman raised all the requirements one by one, Deng Shirong put down his chimney and said, "Okay, I have already understood your requirements on this side. I will go back and tell the man. If there are no problems, I will come back tomorrow to talk to you about the matter of keeping an eye on the house." Although the Guandui couple felt that the speed was too fast, there was no reason to oppose it. After finishing the business, Deng Shirong stopped lingering and rode away on his bicycle. After leaving Sham Shui Tian village, Deng Shirong finally calmed down and looked at the matchmaker reward system in his mind. In the system space, 3 big unity cards were lying quietly, which was exactly 10 times the reward he received after receiving the red envelope sent by the man. Originally, I only received a red envelope of 3 yuan, but when I included the system's 10 times reward, it became 30.3 yuan. The speed of receiving money is really fast. Deng Shirong's journey home was always enjoyable. After paying the contract fee for the kiln and his second son's living expenses, he only had 34 yuan left. When I came to the official house to mediate, I spent several cents on buying candy cakes. In just half a day, his wealth skyrocketed, and now he has over 66 yuan in available cash. This matchmaker reward system is really delicious. Marrying a wife is not an easy task. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Returning to the village, when returning the bike, Deng Shirong secretly decided in his heart that after matching Deng Changfu's marriage with Guanyanging and receiving the matchmaking gift, he would buy a bike and come back. Otherwise, borrowing a bike would not be a problem. After returning the car, Deng Shirong came to Deng Yunxiang's house. "Uncle Jiu. Jiu Gong." Seeing Deng Shirong coming over, Deng Yunxiang and his 3 children all spoke out to greet each other, and their eldest son Deng Changfu warmly brought tobacco, matches, and a hookah. Deng Shirong took the chimney and said straightforwardly, "I have already asked clearly. The woman wants 288 yuan, 300 pounds of grain, and a sewing machine. In addition, Changfu, you have to take the girl to make 6 new sets of clothes. These are all the conditions proposed by the woman." Deng Yunxiang and his wife breathed a sigh of relief upon hearing this, but couldn't help but furrow their brows. They breathed a sigh of relief that the woman did not speak up loudly, and the proposed value, money, and other conditions were within the normal range. And frowning because of this money, the couple really can't come up with it. After all, although both of them are hard-working people and their families have sufficient labor, they have no opportunities to make money in the countryside. After years of frugality, their families have only saved up more than 300 yuan. Now they really can't come up with 500 or 600 yuan in one go. However, Deng Yunxiang and his wife were not too worried. At best, they could borrow money from relatives. After his eldest son got married, it was his turn to have his 2 daughters get married, and there would naturally be 2 large sums of money coming in. It should be no problem to borrow money from relatives temporarily. So Deng Yinxiang only pondered for a moment before decisively making a decision. The conditions proposed by the woman are quite reasonable, and we have no objections. Seeing that Deng Yinxiang, his nephew, did not bargain, he agreed directly to the woman's offer. Deng Shirong nodded satisfactorily and said, "If you have no objections, it will be easy to handle. However, Yinxiang, I suggest that your family give the woman more personal value and strive to marry her back as soon as possible." As soon as these words were spoken, Deng Yinxiang and his family of 5 all looked surprised. Changfu's mother couldn't help but ask, "Uncle Jiu, our family's direct agreement to the conditions proposed by the woman is already sincere enough. Why do we still actively increase the woman's worth? Is there any explanation behind this?" Deng Shirong didn't answer but asked, "You must have heard of the news that our brigade is planning to divide the fields and work alone after harvesting the crops." Deng Yinxiang continued, "This news has spread throughout the village, of course we have heard of it." Deng Shirong smoked a cigarette and put it aside before explaining, "Divide the land and do it alone. It's based on population. If the woman marries your family at this critical moment, it means that their mother's family has less land, while your family has more land. Moreover, if the 2 young people are fast enough, it's possible that your grandchildren will have already been born before the entire team's fields are distributed, and your family can still receive an additional share of the fields. I don't need to say much about how important this land is. Your family has taken such a big advantage. Do you think the price of the woman's body should be raised proactively?" His words are well founded. If he remembers correctly, their Bangjia team started dividing the fields this year, but this year they only divided the more fertile fields. The more barren fields and mountains will not be fully divided until next year. In their past lives, Deng Changfu and Guan Yongying had a blind date when the brigade began to divide the fields. Guan Yongying only married after his mother's family took over the fields. By the time their child was born, the brigade's fields and mountains had already been divided. So, when Deng Changfu mentioned this in his previous life, his tone was quite regretful, stating that if he had married Guan Yongying back a month earlier, their children would probably have been able to get some marginal land. Upon hearing Deng Shirong's explanation, Deng Yinxiang and his family suddenly realized. Deng Yinxiang nodded repeatedly and said, "Uncle Jiu is right. The future in-law's demands for wealth and other benefits are within the normal range. If we don't actively increase our wealth, our in-laws probably won't want his daughter to marry over so early. We must wait until they finish dividing the land before we can get married." Deng Shirong smiled and said, "That's the truth. If your family doesn't want to increase this value, then let's follow the normal marriage process. The other family can release people whenever they want. If your family wants to receive 1 or even 2 more plots of land, they must give more personal value, and then I will go and match them up, striving to marry them back as quickly as possible. The specific choice is up to your family to discuss regardless of ancient or modern times. Farmland is crucial for the common people." Deng Yinxiang didn't need to discuss it with his wife and children, so he directly agreed, "Uncle Jiu, there's no need to discuss it. I agree to increase the woman's worth. I don't know how much would be more appropriate." His wife and children also looked at Deng Shirong upon hearing this. Deng Shirong thought for a moment and said, "We are all aware of how important farmland is to us rural people. I suggest raising the woman's worth to 688 yuan, just spending an extra 400 yuan, but still gaining countless acres of farmland and mountains. This deal is absolutely cost-effective, and it's even unclear whether the woman is willing to do so." Deng Yinxiang and his wife felt a huge pressure upon hearing this. Zhaoshuyuan.com. Their family only has over 300 yuan. Originally, there was a gap of 300 yuan for their son's marriage, but now with an additional 400 yuan worth, there is a gap of 700 yuan. This pressure is really too great. However, Uncle Jiu's words are also very reasonable. Although 400 yuan is more, it is definitely not worth mentioning when compared to countless acres of fields and mountains. Deng Changfu also felt the pressure. Although he was one of the main laborers in the family, He didn't have much money on hand, and his marriage was entirely funded by his parents. He also has a clear understanding of his family's situation and understands that his parents cannot afford to spend so much money. If there is no other way, he can only follow the normal marriage process. As for his two younger sisters, listening to the terrifying amount of money, they couldn't help but feel a heartbeat, and began to fantasize about how much the man would be willing to offer when they got married. All of this is a long story, but in fact, it happened in a moment. Deng Shirong said, "Uncle Joe, I agree with what you said about the value of money, but as you know about our family situation, we definitely can't get out so much money, so I can't answer you for now." At this point, Deng Shirong looked outside and saw that it was still early before the sun set. He stood up and said, "All right, Uncle Joe, I'll go borrow money from my relatives now. If I can raise enough money, please go and arrange for me, Uncle Joe, and try to get my wife back as soon as possible. If we really can't gather this money, then we can only follow the normal marriage process, which is also an unavoidable thing." Deng Shirong also stood up and said, "Okay, then I'll go back first. Can you gather enough money? Give me a definite message tonight." "Okay, I got it." Chapter 10. From frugality to luxury is easy, but from luxury to frugality is difficult. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Friendly reminder, this is a chapter with flavors. Please do not read _carrot while eating. After returning from Deng Shirong's house and not using the restroom for 2 days, Deng Shirong finally couldn't hold back any longer. He picked up a piece of fecal cake and walked towards the fecal lake in the village. Shibing and Shirhu are both transliterated in Hakka. Shibing is a bamboo strip used to scrape the buttocks. In this era, no one in the countryside would use toilet paper to wipe their buttocks, and they all used this polished bamboo strip without any thorns. This type of bamboo stick is about the width of a finger, and its length and thickness are similar to chopsticks. As for Shirhu, it is the public toilet of this era. Nowadays, most rural residents live in mud brick houses, and they don't have toilets at home. At most, they simply enclose a place to take a shower, and then put a small water tank inside. This thing is not used to hold shower water, but to urinate. If you want to use a large toilet, you have to go to the public restroom in the village. Shirhu. Before arriving at Shirhu Lake, Deng Shirong coughed first. This cough also has a way of saying it, because the current Shirhu Lake is only surrounded by a half-person-high bamboo fence, without a door lock. It is really unclear whether there is anyone squatting inside, so people who come to squat usually cough, which is a reminder. If someone is squatting inside, cough in response. Moreover, the current Shirhu Lake is gender-neutral. If you don't remind me to rush in, it's okay to encounter a man inside. Everyone can squat together. But if you encounter a female comrade squatting inside and a man rushes in, the scene will be awkward. So, in this era, female comrades squatting in the pit not only need to make quick decisions, but also need to observe and listen to all directions. Once they hear footsteps outside, they must immediately emit coughing reminders. Deng Shirong coughed and found no response. He held his breath, moved away from the bamboo fence, and then casually closed it. Even though he had been mentally prepared for it long ago, Deng Shirong still found it difficult to accept the place in front of him where there was no place to rest, especially when he started breathing. The indescribable smell seeped into his nose, which was really difficult to resist. If Deng Shirong couldn't hold back anymore, he really wanted to turn around and leave. At this moment, he truly understood that sentence. It is easy to go from frugality to luxury, but it is difficult to go from luxury to frugality. In my past life, I came to Shirhu to squat in a pit, which lasted until their family built a new house in 1989. At that time, everyone had long been accustomed to the smell of Shirhu and didn't feel much uncomfortable. Deng Shirong's family built a septic tank and had an independent bathroom after 1989, and even used a flush toilet after 2008. Later, after his great-grandson taught him how to use a smartphone, he sat on the toilet reading novels for half an hour. How comfortable it was to use the restroom at that time. Looking back now, the place to settle is either feces or urine. There are still countless tons of feces and urine in the pit behind the buttocks, and there are countless fecal lake insects crawling around in the feces and urine. A pungent smell is desperately crawling into the nose, and the scene is as disgusting as it is. It's strange that Deng Shirong could easily accept such a strong contrast. Deng Shirong completed this toilet squat in less than a minute, and the speed was extremely rare in his squatting career. After putting on his pants, he rushed out. Even if I only stayed inside for less than a minute, my clothes were smoked and had a faint odor of feces. At this moment, Deng Shirong made a decision in his heart. After making money, he would build a house as soon as possible, and everything else would be arranged backwards. Otherwise, life would be really difficult. He wants to enjoy his rebirth, but he doesn't want to suffer from it every day. At night, under the bright moonlight, Deng Shirong and his children sat at the doorstep to cool off, each holding a fan and constantly driving away mosquitoes. Thinking that his sons and daughters had eaten porridge with pickles for another day today, Deng Shirong asked, "Jane, can the rice at home get new food?" In recent years, Deng Yunjin has been the head chef at home, and she has a clear understanding of how long we can eat our oil, salt, rice, and noodles. When she hears this, she doesn't even have to think about it and answers, "Of course we can. At our current rate of eating, we should be able to eat it for about 3 more months." When Deng Shirong heard this, he had a clear idea and said, "That's good. Tomorrow, when you get up to cook congee, put more rice in it, and then take out half a pot of rice. I'll go to the brigade to cut some pork and fry it for you." Hearing that there will be pork to eat tomorrow, the children are all refreshed. My eldest son Deng Yuntai couldn't help but ask, "Dad, what day is tomorrow?" Deng Shirong was deeply moved by these words. In this era, people were really poor, and meat was only available during festivals and special occasions, unlike later generations who were fed up with meat every day. He smiled and said, "Today, I helped Changfu find a matchmaker and received a red envelope of 3 yuan, so I plan to buy some meat to come back and give you a dental service." Deng Yunjin was surprised and said, "Dad, when did you start matchmaking people?" She is already 18 years old this year, and in this era, she is already of marriageable age, so she has some knowledge about blind dates. She knows that matchmakers only receive red envelopes when they arrange for both parties to meet. According to common sense, if a matchmaker wants to arrange a meeting between a man and a woman, they must run back and forth countless times. It is rare for someone like Deng Shirong to arrange a meeting on the same day as the matchmaker. Starting from this morning. Looking for Shuyuan www.zhaoshuyuan.com. As he spoke, Deng Shirong briefly recounted the matchmaking process for today before finally saying, "You guys, Yun Chang, should come over later. If he can borrow money from relatives this afternoon smoothly, then Changfu probably won't be long before he can marry his wife back home." As soon as Deng Shirong finished speaking, he saw someone walking towards their house with an oil lamp in their hand from a distance. They approached and saw that it was none other than Deng Yunxiang. "It's true that Chow Chow is here. Uncle Jiu. Brother Yunxiang." After greeting each other, Deng Yunjin handed over the water pipe and tobacco and said, "Yunxiang, burn the pipe first." This is also a characteristic of the times. The best way to entertain guests is to have guests come and hand over a hookah and tobacco. Deng Yunxiang said hello and then took the chimney and tobacco. After smoking 2 pipes with a thud, he began to talk about business and said, "Uncle Jiu, I went to my elder sister's house this afternoon, and my wife also went back to her mother's house. Finally, I have enough money to gather. Could you please help me arrange it tomorrow?" Deng Shirong nodded and said, "No problem. Tomorrow, after I have breakfast, I will go to the woman's house to discuss this matter. I will try to arrange to check the house before the production team harvests the crops. After the harvest is over, I will choose an auspicious day to register for marriage. I will definitely not let your daughter.in.law miss the team's land allocation. Deng Shirong thought that if his family could get an extra share of the land, and even if his son and daughter.in.law were to win, perhaps his grandchildren could also catch the train. He patted his chest and promised, Uncle Joe, if this is done, I will definitely give you a big red envelope. Deng Shirong laughed and said, okay, then I'm waiting for your big red envelope. After discussing the matter, Deng Shirong stayed behind to chat a few more words before returning home satisfied with the oil lamp.